Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. My name is Tori, and I am the Marketing and Events Officer at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Our webinar today is an introduction to SharePoint and is presented by Stephanie Kachayas, who is the Senior ICT Advisor at InfoExchange. Now, we'll have a question and answer session right at the end of the webinar, so if you do have any questions, do type them in the question box, but we will go through them at the end. I'll now hand it over to Stephanie. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Tori. That's great. Welcome, everyone. Thanks very much for your time today. I'm very pleased to be with you for this hour, talking to you a little bit about SharePoint and its role in Office 365, which is a cloud-based solution. So today we're going to cover what SharePoint is, some examples of how people use SharePoint, and I've got some screenshots to share with you, some clarification about what SharePoint isn't, and some alternative or complementary systems that are often presented alongside SharePoint, and then some of the differences between the two, because it can be confusing sometimes. And then some tips towards the end are just about best practice and important things to remember if you're thinking about implementing SharePoint at your organisation. A bit of background about me. I'm as mentioned, a senior consultant here at InfoExchange, which is a non-for-profit organisation. We have a vision of technology for social justice, and we deliver that across different arms of work. We have an online applications arm where we develop our own proprietary, our own software that is geared towards the human services sector, so things like case management systems, referral management systems, service database systems, and things like that. We have a digital inclusion arm which runs sort of outreach and sort of specialist digital programs. We won a Google award, we won a Google grant to do a homelessness application, a mobile application for geared towards homeless people, and that's a digital inclusion project. And then we have the consulting and ICT services arm, which is what the team that I'm in, and what we do is work with the sector, the non-for-profit sector around Australia and in New Zealand, building capabilities. So that involves lots of consulting projects, which is mainly what I do. Implementation of new systems, like particularly Office 365, with that being made free for non-for-profits in Australia. It's been a huge area for us and our clients that we work in. And then also we do ICT services for our clients, so we provide managed support and other sort of specialised IT support, ongoing management for them as well. So that's what InfoExchange does. We're a non-for-profit ourselves, and we work only with other non-for-profits. So really excited to be sharing some knowledge with you today if you're thinking about SharePoint. So what is SharePoint, and why is it important, and why might you be thinking about it? Well, it's in really simple terms, it's a content management system, or a CRM. CMS. I'm sorry. CRM is customer relationship management. CMS, which is a content management system. It was developed in around 2000 by Microsoft as this sort of catch-all platform for collaboration and communication across a large business. And for a long time, it was a server-only product, much like an Outlook, a sort of an Exchange server for email that a business might purchase from Microsoft. They might purchase also, a SharePoint server product, where it's a shared platform for documents and other sorts of communication platforms. And back in the day, it was really only the big end of town that could really afford this sort of product, because it was quite expensive to purchase, and then quite expensive to run. It was another piece of infrastructure to support and maintain, just like any other server. And it was, because it's a system that does a lot of things, and we'll get into that in a moment later about how varied and wide it is, it's also the kind of product that can be pushed and pulled in lots of different directions and developed on. And throughout the years, many developers have built applications that are built on a SharePoint base, or assume that SharePoint is their kind of base system for a lot of kind of business systems, things like forms, workflow systems, and document management. Throughout the years, the system has obviously grown and developed and modified, and especially now with the advent of cloud computing and Microsoft's Office 365 cloud offering, which is a suite of tools that they're now offering SharePoint as part of this wider suite, and the barriers to adopting SharePoint the technical barriers are a lot lower. You no longer need to install it on a server, for instance. It's just coming out of the box for you when you sign up for Office 365. So today, so that's what SharePoint is. Today, I assume very little prior knowledge about the product. It really is an intro session. We have another session coming up on the 30th of September with my colleague Matt Walton, who will be talking more generally about Office 365. I'll talk a little bit about Office 365 today because it's sort of, you kind of can't talk about one without talking about the other, and indeed Matt will also mention SharePoint in his session. But SharePoint is a big thing. It's a big part of Office 365. It's a big product altogether, and it kind of deserves its own hour because of its complexity and its history in the market. And it is a bit of a sort of an unknown for a lot of people. So really this session is about explaining what it is, and as I mentioned, some things to think about if you start thinking about implementing it, but without getting into too much technical detail. There are some other webinars we're running which go into a little bit more deep dive sessions on how you'd actually build a SharePoint site and how you'd actually start to technically think about building it out. This is really more of an introductory session. So as I mentioned, it's a system that organisations use to build secure internal websites, also known as intranets. But this intranet can be a lot of different things and have a lot of different things in it. It used to be that big organisations could afford to buy it as their content management system, and it was a secure on-premises or server-based product. I mean, servers don't have to be on-premises anymore. You can host a server in a cloud environment, but essentially you'd still be running that server and be responsible for running it. But now it's available as part of the Office on 365 suite, and so therefore all you need to really access it is your subscription and your login, and to access it you just get into it via a web browser like Internet Explorer, Chrome or Firefox. And really it's a secure place, so it's, even though it's a website and you've got with SharePoint you'll have in Office 365 it's all just a URL, just like, it'll be, I think it's portal.microsoft.com or something like that, and then each of your SharePoint sites will have its own URL, which you could obviously navigate to that new URL from any computer around the world as long as it was connected to the internet. What you'd see would be a login screen when you go there, and that login screen would ask for your Office 365 login, so your email and your email login. And that's how you get in. So that's where the security is built into it, is in the web portal part of it. It's just like any other web portal that now exists, like like your Google account. Everyone goes to the same Google address, and you log in with your Google account, and it lets you into your area of Google. Very similar to Facebook and basically most web-based platforms these days. So, as I mentioned, it used to be that computers would connect to an on-premises SharePoint server, but this new world is now hosted in Microsoft's data centers. They used to be hosted for Australia in Singapore and Hong Kong, but this year Microsoft have opened up their Sydney and Melbourne data centers, and all new sign-ups for Office 365, I think post-April, are now in Australia, and slowly throughout the next year, existing Microsoft clients in Australia will be migrated to the Sydney and Melbourne servers, and that'll happen sort of behind the scenes. If you're already on there, you won't really notice it happening. I mean, if you've got tech guys who pay attention to that sort of thing, they can see where it's being hosted. But for most people, it will just happen behind the scenes. And this product, Office 365, has a wide range of apps, and I'm actually in that image, not even showing all of them, but there's essentially some major parts of the product. The biggest one being email, obviously, Outlook in the cloud, and all of your email being hosted in the Office 365 environment and going through those servers. So email is secure and hosted through that. So you can still hook up the Office 365 email service to your Outlook client on your machine. So you go to work every day and you open up Outlook and you're still getting emails and it's still looking and feeling like a normal email experience. But in the back end, it's actually running through the Office 365 service as opposed to a dedicated server that you manage. Similarly, you've now got, well, not really similarly, but alongside email is Skype for Business comes with Office 365. So that's a IM and video conferencing system that businesses are starting to use. It used to be called Link. Then Microsoft bought Skype and now have rebranded Link as Skype for Business. It's an internal business IM tool, and you can, IM your colleagues, instant message your colleagues, that is, and have little video conferences with them, and even people externally, if they have Skype and Skype for Business accounts, you can connect with them. You've got Office Online, which is the little Word and Excel and PowerPoint things there. That's the ability to edit and view Word and PowerPoint and Excel documents in the cloud, much like a Google Docs does, where you can you just edit a document in the browser. This is the same sort of thing. If you open up Word in SharePoint or OneDrive, it will open up in the browser and you can view and edit it there. You can also then tell it to open up in your application if you've got Word installed on your machine, which most people do. And so most of the time when you're at work, you don't really use Office in the cloud, Office Online, but it is really useful if you're on a machine you don't normally use, or you're not sure whether the machine does have it. You can just quickly view those documents in the browser. The functionality is not quite the same and not as complicated. If you've got lots of templates and complicated Word documents, it's better to work in the application. But for quick viewing and things like that, it can be really handy and quick to have that. And then really today what we'll be focusing on mostly is SharePoint, but there's also OneDrive for Business. Now, I'll go into the difference a bit later, but OneDrive for Business is your own personal document storage and area, as in each unit, I'll jump ahead. Each user logs in and they have their own email address, they have their own account in Office 365, and that account comes with 1 terabyte worth of data just for them that they can then store their own documents in. So they can log in, they can go to OneDrive and just upload documents to the cloud and have them there and be able to find them from any place, from any computer, as long as you've got your login. So that's an individual user's account and storage. That's different to SharePoint Online, which is a sort of centrally managed system of sites and document libraries that is shared and that everyone can access. So, my OneDrive account, by default, only I have access to those documents. I can open it up and share it with other people, but that's up to me as the user to control. Whereas in SharePoint Online, by default, it's shared, and also by default, often the user, a normal Office user wouldn't have a lot of control over the look and feel of the site. That would be something that the managers or the SharePoint administrators and the leaders around that who've been chosen to be given that sort of responsibility would have. So that's the difference there. So an easy way to think about it, a lot of organisations have like a shared drive with their documents, and they also have and that's a shared server that houses documents, and everyone can get in and see it, like a P drive or an M drive, or people call it all different sorts of things. And then OneDrive would be, some people have similarly like a H drive, which is like your own, everyone has their own folders and their own drives. That's what OneDrive for Business would be, the equivalent to. But today is most, so that was a bit of background about Office 365 in general. There's also other applications coming onto Office 365, things like Office 365 Video, Delve, Sway, you might have seen some of them. They're all sort of, they're new and they're kind of in development. Video is probably the most easy to explain in a sense that it's like its own like kind of like Office 365 YouTube. So it's a video streaming platform built in Office 365, which is quite a new development for Microsoft. But all of those things are sort of, I guess they're kind of in beta, and I don't really want to get too distracted by them. They're the sort of things that users can explore and check out themselves, and you can sort of start playing with. They're kind of, in my mind, also kind of experimental and very much moving, a sign that Microsoft is moving more and more into a sort of more social world. I can ask, if you've got questions about it, we can come back to that later. Oh, and one more thing, in Office 365 you also get Yammer, which I'll also talk about a little bit later when I talk about the differences between SharePoint and Yammer, but we'll talk about that later. So SharePoint is essentially it can do a few different things at once. It can be an intranet, which is again, a concept that was developed for big organisations, probably about 15, 20 years ago, when this idea that, okay, we need somewhere that's centralised that we can navigate to in a browser that only the people in this organisation can see, and that isn't hosted on the web, that is, that you can't just go to it like you could go to theage.com or any other, website. It's not quite like a website in that sense. It's secure, and yeah, so it's just for the organisation. So that's what it's there for, but it's like a web-based platform for information for staff. As part of that, it can do document management, which is, obviously a storage solution for documents, and it does some pretty cool things that I'll talk a little bit about later in terms of what it can do with document management. I think it's one of SharePoint's biggest strengths, is its document management capabilities. And then it also has this concept of team sites, which is sort of like a little mini intranet, which can be sort of just for certain teams and can be chunked up for individuals that individual teams to let them sort of continue to collaborate just on a project or on a team-based thing as opposed to a wider organisational-wide thing. And depending on your organisation, these different kinds of features will appeal to you depending on what it is that you need them to do. So that brings us to why use it, and I mean this is the big question that I think a lot of organisations should be grappling with if they're thinking about doing it. Is literally why? What's the point? Why would you? What does this bring that that it doesn't already do? So it can serve as a platform for organisations to communicate. So have like a homepage with information on it for staff, a central hub of useful information, links to other useful systems. Have it as your homepage, have it as a link to your timesheet system, have it as a link to your HR, your general HR system, so staff know how to, go in and submit a leave request, or have it as a link off to a client management system or a CRM, a customer relationship management system, or something, other systems that you've got that you use, and that's what we use there. So that's what that is. Document management. It can provide a sophisticated document library storage solution for documents that is a lot more flexible and is a lot more feature-rich than a standard file share system, and it's really good for that. It can be really good for that. There are some, in my opinion, this is one of the areas where document libraries. It's a double-edged sword because they're particularly sophisticated and they do a lot of things, but they're also a little bit more tricky to implement, and they need a little bit more technical savvy to use them. And we're very used to using file shares, and they're actually a very simple, almost crude tool. People understand file shares because it mimics a physical file storage system where you've got a folder and you put the documents in a folder. And if you are well organised and you take it seriously, then your organisation probably has a nice set folder structure and a nice set so that's great, but that's about as sophisticated as you get. Whereas SharePoint goes a lot further in terms of sophistication, but along with that requires staff to be a little bit more savvy in their use and skilled up in their use, and that is often a little bit tricky to manage and implement, because it does represent probably one of the biggest changes in people's just day-to-day workflows, is this idea of having to change the way they use documents and think about documents. And like I said, it also can support teams working on projects together, providing centralised spot for task tools and calendars and things like that. So it can be potentially a place for teams to work together and have everything in one spot, and again allow people to easily find and see other people's work. So I'll start going through some examples. One example is this idea of an intranet. Now, this screenshot, I purposely put it in because it's very, very vanilla, like to the point where, like, literally vanilla. There is nothing special about this. It's not been branded at all. It's the out of the box SharePoint blue color, and there's not even a logo. There's just a typical sort of thing you would see on a home page. You've got links to other applications along the right. In the middle, you've got a news feed, sort of announcements feed, where you can click to read more. You've got a company events calendar down the bottom. You've got a staff directory. Along the left, you've got important document libraries that you want people to go and read, so policies and training, maybe forms or something like that along the left. And then along the top, you'll see there it says home, finance, HR, sales and marketing, and that's your team sites there. So that's where you go to look into particular areas of your business to find out more about that area, whether it is to work or whether or not it's maybe like a shop front for that area. So if you're a HR team, for example, you could have a home for HR. People could like put in service requests, find key HR documents, and other sorts of key information like that. This is also an example. This screenshot is an example of how a SharePoint site can be skinned or made to look a certain way. That often takes someone with specialised skills to go in and skin a site and put customised look and feel and fonts and colours over a SharePoint site, and that's its own thing, and you can go and purchase those sorts of skills, or you can train yourself up to do it. It takes a little bit of coding, but essentially you can skin a SharePoint site to look that way. But most of my examples today aren't going to be like that. They're just going to be out of the box. For example, this is another example of a very basic kind of. There are no pictures here. Normally I guess you could put more pictures in, but this is the sort of thing again you would see, very, very basic, but at least with some extra different colours thrown in, for a particular SharePoint intranet site. So like an announcements feed, a CEO updates blog, upcoming events, some links to social media, and then your sub-sites along the top again. I deliberately show very vanilla examples because I think often every site is different. I think you've all seen websites, you've all probably even seen, potentially you've seen intranets before, and as you know, lots and lots is common, and I guess I just like to show the basic building blocks of these things that can be used. Another thing that you can have as part of SharePoint is forms. Now this form has been modified with a product called InfoPath, which is essentially just a form building form building tool, but they sit on top of SharePoint lists and libraries, and you can then fill it in, and it'll go and be stored as a line item, and then things you can put a workflow on the back of a form, or you could at least just send through a thing, a workflow or something like that, or an alert to someone to let them know that a new starter, for example, has put forward. So this is a sort of thing that that SharePoint can support and be a platform for. My point here about forms, though, would be that, and it's something that will come up later when I talk about implementation, is always to think about the scope. And this is a general comment that I would give all clients about systems in general, is what system do you want to use things for, and really think through, do a bit of business analysis in your own organisation about what systems should support what processes. So, for example, this is like a new starter form. We built it in SharePoint because, often in an organisation, a new starter process, like someone coming on board, touches a lot of different kinds of teams. Like it touches an IT team, it touches a HR team, it touches maybe just general office managers. There's lots of people involved in the process. It doesn't just sit with one team. And that's why a system like SharePoint, which is quite overarching, is quite useful, because it allows it to go to lots of different people. If it was just purely a HR form, or purely, like if it was a apply for leave form, for example, that really just sort of goes to HR and or your manager, that sort of stuff potentially can be sorted out and dealt with in a dedicated system for that, like a finance or a HR system. And if you've already got those systems in place, I would think long and hard about where you think SharePoint fits in that ecosystem, and whether or not in fact introducing another type of system and another type of form over the top is actually making things more complicated for you as an administrator of systems, and potentially look at consolidating systems. But there's lots of different factors that would go into that sort of decision, and I guess that's my point, is that you just need to think about those factors. So this is the thing that I was mentioning before that SharePoint does really well, is document management. So it has things like a little sort of, when you go into a library, which is, a library is where SharePoint stores documents. Go into a library, you'll see your documents there and your folders there in front of you. You can kind of hover over it and see like a quick view of the document, a quick view of the link to the document, and a bunch of other like menu tools. Things like where you can check out, check in, view history, and view history, which is one of the better ones. So you can see inbuilt version control in the document. So a lot of organisations have systems that are like sort of makeshift document management, document version control systems, where they've gone, I make a document in a file share and I call it, draft report, version 1. Put your initials in, like SK, and then put the date on the document or something like that. Like that would be a good document naming convention if you're working on a file share system, because it's very clear, allows you to sort easily, and you can you can see all the things there. Because file shares don't by default do all that for you. You have to manually do it, and then when you want to share it with someone, you send them the link to the document and you say, here's the document, please make please make your changes, and they go in and they say, they rename, they save as, they make a copy, which is what save as does, and they manually rename the document something else, and they call it version, or they keep it the same name and they call it version 2, and they put their initials on it, and they can just see it there. So this basically eradicates that, because what it does is by default tell you how many times a document has been edited, and also tells you who edits it. It allows you to, and when they edited it, so the date and the time of that change, and any comments that they would like to potentially make on that document. So it's really really cool, and saves a lot of hassle. So there's just one version, and that person can go in and edit it at any time. And anyone can go in and just edit it, provided they have the right permissions, can go in and edit it. So this is one of my favourite features of SharePoint, and I know that it makes a big difference for a lot of people's productivity and just in general keeping things organised with your documents, which very quickly become out of control. Another thing it does, which is really cool, is that if you've got Office 2010 or up installed on your machine, or if you have, it also works in Office Online in the browser, you can have two people co-authoring or editing a document at the same time, which previously, when you're in a file share, you go to open a document, it says this document is locked for editing by someone else, please open a read-only version, because only one person can edit the document. This doesn't happen anymore in SharePoint. You open the document, it'll say to you someone else is in the document, a little pop-up, as you can sort of see in this example down here, a little pop-up says, someone else is in this document. Over the share button, you'll see a little refresh sign, and in that refresh sign is a sense of pushing through changes, and every time you refresh, you push through your changes and the other person can see it, and vice versa. And also, when someone else is working on a section of the document, so in this example, you can sort of see there along the top, there's a section being edited, and it's got like a sort of little bracket around it with someone's name next to it. That's saying that your colleague is working on that part of the document, and it won't let you change it. And then once they've made their change and have stopped working on it and they've pushed their changes through, it'll refresh, you'll be able to see it, and if they're out of it, you can start editing that again. But it won't let you work on top of each other. Like you'd have to say to the other person, I'm going to work on page 2 and you work on page 15, and then we'll refresh and see our changes. So it kind of is built in to stop you modifying other people's changes it won't let you conflict those changes. Another thing that it will do, that I say here use with caution, is sync to an offline client, sync to your desktop. So because that's all well and good if you want to go to find your documents in a browser, which is what it's designed to do primarily, is that you to find your documents instead of going to a file share like in a Windows Explorer view, you actually go to the browser like you would go find a Google Doc in a browser, for example, and edit it and use those documents there. If you want to be able to see those documents in your Windows Explorer, you can press this button Sync, and it will take down a copy to your local machine, and you can then open documents and edit them there. Now, I say use with caution because, unfortunately, this feature is still quite buggy and has caused a lot of headaches for a lot of our users. It works well if staff are trained properly and can identify when it seems like something might be happening, like something isn't syncing properly, and are trained to deal with it well and trained to sort of troubleshoot an issue when they see it. Because what will happen is if there's a sync error and it doesn't save changes up, it quite quickly becomes so it can become really nasty quickly, because someone else might not make a change and that'll overwrite someone else's changes, and unfortunately the tool isn't quite up to scratch with dealing with multiple people doing, syncing down a document and making changes. It can deal with it if the user is a savvy and, like I said, can identify when they think something's going wrong and can go in and fix a problem that they think is happening, like manually resync something. But often I've found clients either don't have the time to put into that sort of training, or if they do, their staff just don't quite get it, and you can explain it to the cows come home, but they just don't quite get it. And and it's fair enough because it should just work. And so I guess I use it, and my colleagues and I use this feature, and we get away with it, but we are quite experienced with it. So I guess it's just I just like to caution users about this issue at this stage. Microsoft do know it's a bug, and apparently you're working on it, but with any big organisation, you're never quite sure when things are going to get released, and I don't know when things are going to get fixed with this one. But it is, if it worked properly, it would be a fantastic feature, and it does work as long as you're careful with it. So I just sort of like to put that in there because I'd hate to give advice and then people find problems with it. Back to some other things that SharePoint does. It does team collaboration very well. It lets you have a site for teams, for example, and they can log in and work on documents that they're all working on together, have a news feed, have a project summary and a tasks feed, and in general just sort of have a hub of information for a particular project if they're managing something, which is really cool. And it does this really well, and it does this kind of out of the box really well because there are inbuilt templates that SharePoint will give you that provides this sort of information that just sort of pops up, and when you build a new site, it will just build it in this style for you. So there's very little configuration that you need to do to get it to work like this. This is just a close-up view where you can have, you can have a task list. You can tick off tasks as they happen. You can assign them to people, and they'll get an email saying, "Oh, you've been assigned this task," and you can sort of put them up graphically on like a little timeline and see and sort of. It's not Microsoft Project. It's not a full-blown project management tool. But if you're not needing that sort of level of detail, if you really just sort of want to sort of see everything laid out quickly like that, this is a really nice way of having everyone on the same page. So I mentioned before a couple of different tools that SharePoint can be used in parallel with, and the two ones I want to focus on are OneDrive for Business and Yammer. So I mentioned before, back to this page, OneDrive for Business is part of Office 365, and so is SharePoint. But they are actually quite different things, and this is the one thing that, a lot of clients, when they first start looking into Office 365, it can be a bit confusing to understand that this is a different thing. So I just like to make this really clear. They're different applications in Office 365, and they do very different things. You can see them both up here when you go into your Office 365 launcher. You can see your sites, and you can see OneDrive right next to it, and that's another, obviously big indicator that the two are different. Essentially, as I mentioned before, OneDrive is personal and is related to you. SharePoint is a shared platform, and both host documents, and both deal with libraries essentially in exactly the same way. In fact, both are just essentially, like OneDrive is just one big document library, and in SharePoint you can have multiple document libraries in different sites and for teams. But the bones of working with the document library would be the same. It's the same technology. But they're just in different areas, and they have very different functions. So when I've had a few clients say, "Oh, we want to use OneDrive for our documents," and I have to sort of say to them, "Well, you realise that that's just, it's not designed for sharing. Like, you can share, like you can obviously share. You can go into OneDrive and click share and send the link and send edit links to other people, just like you would in Google Drive or something like that. So you can share them, but they're not, like, ultimately when you leave, like if you left an organisation, your OneDrive for Business account would be sort of locked down to you and would then become inactive. And so any documents an administrator would need to go in and pull out all those documents sort of in quite a cumbersome task, because they were never shared, they were never in a centralised spot, they were always just connected to your account. So I guess that's a big difference between thinking about the way documents work in Office 365. So in OneDrive for Business, you get 1 terabyte per user for free out of the box, but that's not expandable. However, it's obviously quite a lot of storage. Every file is owned by the user and is not necessarily intended for shared use. In SharePoint Online, by default, you get 10 gigabytes plus 0.5 gig, so 500 meg per user, per license that you assign to users, which have come for free. But this is expandable, which you would then pay for, and I think it's about, I think last time I checked it was $2.40 per gigabyte per year. So if you needed to buy an extra, say, 100 gigabytes for your SharePoint storage for putting in documents, for example, if you wanted to buy, say, 100 gig, it would be $240 a year, which isn't too bad, I guess. I have heard rumours that this model of storage is going to change because it kind of doesn't make sense. SharePoint is sold as is sold and is intended to be the organisation-wide storage. Why individual users need 1 tera in a business account, like I can imagine offering 1 terabyte to consumers for personal storage, but for a business account, why each staff member needs 1 terabyte? I don't actually quite understand that, but because they really shouldn't be. I don't know. I can't really understand. I mean, I've worked in organisations where everyone's had their own drives, and there are definitely some people that save a lot of, gigabytes and gigabytes of stuff on there, but they don't even get close to hitting 1 terabyte even then. So I kind of don't quite get that. But anyway, so SharePoint Online is the preferred place to store shared documents, obviously, and like I said, but it is expandable and you can buy more. It will store files, but it will also store calendars, contacts, and other things in there, and the data is centrally managed, intended for shared drives. Both can be taken offline with the OneDrive desktop client, which is what I mentioned before being a bit buggy in the tool. The OneDrive desktop client works much better with your OneDrive account because obviously you're the only person syncing it, and so it's actually less. It works fine because it'll be only to one machine that it's syncing down to, your machine, because it's your account. And often that works a little better. Where it gets tricky is when you sync down a SharePoint document library and other people have synced that library as well, and it struggles when there have been changes to things offline. Yammer is a completely other beast that I want to quickly touch on. Yammer is a social network built for the enterprise. So it was developed a few years ago as an inbuilt in-organisation-wide sort of SharePoint product, and it was cool. It got some good traction, and then Microsoft bought it. So Microsoft acquired the Yammer technology. I think they paid a lot of money for it, and now Yammer is essentially another aspect of the Office 365 suite. So if we go back here, you can see that Yammer is an application, an Office 365 app that you can click on and go to, and it will have the same login as your Office 365 and essentially just be another application, just like webmail or SharePoint. Yammer is more and more replacing what once they wanted SharePoint to do, which was to be a platform for talking, essentially. One of the biggest drivers that a lot of clients come to me about for SharePoint and what they think SharePoint can help them with and what it potentially can help them with is all-staff email and wanting to reduce the level of sort of noise and clutter in an organisation where once you hit a certain point, a certain size, that starts to become a real issue for people. And the idea would be that, well, if we put announcements on SharePoint, or if we put a feed from the CEO on SharePoint and people get an email alert from it, which is really easy to set up, then we can stop that. And that's true. You can still do that in SharePoint. Announcements feeds are still very popular and definitely something that you can easily implement and does come out of the box. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. But what that doesn't do in SharePoint is this concept of social. So this concept of being able to comment back, like something, the website being very fluid and sort of like very interactive and kinetic, so like a Facebook page where it's always updating, just sort of you're not even needing to refresh the page, it's just always, there's always new things popping up in the feed, same as Twitter or something like that. This idea that there's very little mimicking real life, I suppose, that you don't go through life, you know, refreshing your experience, it's just happening, and people are just chatting that way. So Yammer does that. Yammer, instead of having like an announcements feed, has just, you know, like a home feed. It has announcements at the top there, but that's just another type of post. It has these post feeds where, you know, you post something like you would on Facebook, and you can upload photos, and you can put a poll up, and you can praise people, and you can like other people's posts, you can reply directly to other people, you can tag people in your response, you can send direct messaging to people, you can create groups, which is quite a big feature in Yammer, where you can either top down, you know, like create a group and say, all this team are going to be in this group, and I'm making you making you all in this group because you all work together, and, you know, I expect you all to be talking here. Or you can let them be kind of developed from the ground up and let staff create their own groups and kind of form organic groups that maybe across team or not really necessarily related to your org structure, but a cross org structure sort of idea. You can have both. You can do both. You can allow your users to do that, or you can be quite top down about the design of it. I guess the whole point of Yammer is that it's got that flexibility built into it. So that's what Yammer does really well. And potentially, and I say this to clients that say to me, we just really want to cut down on all staff email, is potentially, if that's really your biggest driver and that's potentially all you want to do is have a better platform for communication, maybe SharePoint's not quite right, because SharePoint does a lot of great things, and it does, you know, as I said, project management, document management really well. But if it's about communication, then this is the tool that Microsoft have got for you sitting there for free that is so much easier to implement, and it just comes out of the box like this, and all you need to do is sort of, you know, create a usage policy if you want, you know, set up some admins for it, and then just start building your groups and then promoting it internally, and then it's pretty easy to implement compared to SharePoint, because SharePoint takes a lot of time to set up all these sites and build all these applications built into it. Well, build, you know, create new. You don't actually need to code anything, but you still need to go in and tell it to do something, whereas Yammer just sort of does it. So that's the difference between what I would call what the two tools do really well, and Yammer is obviously a social tool. And if that's one of your big drivers, then I would seriously consider looking at Yammer for your organisation as opposed to SharePoint, or potentially just thinking about how they work together. And you can definitely get them to work together. On our page on Info Exchange, we have our Yammer. We use Yammer quite heavily for internal collaboration and communication, and we've on our front page of the intranet, which is a SharePoint on Office 365 site, we have I've just embedded the Yammer feed in there so that the two can be sort of connected and have a sense of connection. Or you can not. You can just have it sort of somewhere else. You can not embed it if you don't want. But I guess the point is that the two can sort of work together, and as long as you're clear about what the boundaries are for each one and use each one for each strength, they can be really good working together. Okay, so as we come into the home stretch, and I hopefully we'll have 5 minutes for questions at the end, I do want to quickly talk about if what you've seen today, you know, is interesting to you, and you do think that you can see some benefits for you in your organisation. These are some tips that I would give you as to how you're going to go about it. One, first of all, is to be strategic about your implementation. Really ask the hard questions. Why do you need or want SharePoint? Is an intranet the best tool to solve the problems that you want? Like, for example, if it's communication, is something like Yammer better? Or maybe even another tool that's not in the Microsoft suite that maybe needs, you know, there are things like there's a tool called Slack that is, you know, very popular at the moment, which, you know, you can have an app and it's kind of an alternative to email. Or I don't know, there are lots of products out there that do different sorts of things. Maybe that's really more what you need. Another example would be if you want to get forms for HR, you know, if you want a better leave system or something like that, then potentially you want an HR system. So really think about what are the drivers in your organisation, like what are the pain points and what are the things you want to fix, and what's the best tool for that. Another thing that you need to think about is your organisation ready culturally for this type of way of working and communication? SharePoint presents a big change in the way people are asked to communicate and also potentially to deal with documents management as well. You know, you might want to go through a whole redesign of your information architecture when you go to deliver SharePoint, which I'll talk about in a moment and what that means. But you might be asking people to think very differently about how they work and how they organise themselves. And do you have the resources and do you have the capability internally to do that? Also, are you ready size-wise? You know, like some organisations come to us asking for intranet, and they're 10 or 20 people, and there are times when I sort of think to myself, I mean, sure, you can start to put your documents up there pretty easily, but for other things like communications and forms and workflows and things like that, when you're that small, that sort of efficiency kind of might not be necessary. I mean, you probably all sit, unless you're really dispersed, you probably all sit together anyway and probably all talk anyway. Is putting in a new system like that before you're ready just adding another burden? And are you confident people will actually use it the way they want to use it? So what is answering that question really clearly up front, what is the purpose of SharePoint for your organisation is crucial. It also avoids scope creep. SharePoint often is implemented and everyone wants a million things from it. And it gets really unwieldy really quickly and gets overwhelming for people really quickly, and that's not cool. So if you answer that question, you hopefully can help manage that. Obviously, think about how you're going to do it. Do you have the capability and capacity internally to do it? Would you need an external partner to help you do it? And who will manage it ongoing? What's another thing that people sort of underestimate with SharePoint, and well, truly with any system? We'll just build it and implement it, and it'll just sit there and tick away. It's not quite that simple. All systems need upkeep. All systems need to be always interrogated and improved. And especially something like SharePoint, which is so closely connected with how people work, you need to be thinking about whether or not it works for people. So what would SharePoint look like? What will, like physically, well, or not physically, but virtually, what will its structure be? What will it have in it? So, you know, SharePoint sites are hierarchical, and they have sites and sub-sites underneath them, and you need to start thinking, you need to jot down on paper and workshop it out very quickly at the beginning. Once you've decided what your purpose is, what it's actually going to look like. Are you going to have a home site? It's going to have content in it. Then you're going to have sub-sites for projects or programs or departments, and then maybe even sub-sites under that. And how many libraries do you think people will need? And these are all and also what kind of permissions would be involved in different areas of the site. These are the sorts of things you need to map out and think about and analyse for you. And every organisation is different. Governance, who's gonna manage it? What kind of permissions and access strategies will you use? Will you only lock down things that have to be locked down for good reason, like confidentiality or sensitivity, or will you be quite siloed and say only certain team members can see these certain team sites, you know, because that's just how we work? You know, that might be good for people to feel like they're working securely, but that comes with more administration overhead and is more work for whoever's managing those security groups. So there's always these things you need to think about as whether or not it's worth it, how you're going to do it. Do you have a good idea of responsibility and accountability for SharePoint, and does everyone know who's in charge of different areas and how they would make changes, or who they would go to ask for changes? and just in general thinking about the practicalities of administrative overhead and if you were to maintain rigid silos, how you would manage that and whether or not you've got the right people to do it. So if you're still thinking about implementing SharePoint, my comments would be that you should define its purpose, think about your current systems and information architecture and where it would fit in and how it would improve it potentially. Assign people and give it the time and energy and resources that it needs to do, because it is a big job. And then consider also the cultural implications and how you'll get people on board and come on the journey with you, and that's when it becomes like a change management process for you and your organisation, as implementing any system would be. All right, we've finished about 5 minutes early, which is perfect. So if you've got any more questions, I'd be really keen to answer them in the time we've got remaining. Hopefully this has been useful for you.
We do have a few questions, Stephanie.
Great.
So John asks, can volunteers without an Office 365 subscription access our SharePoint site?
Good question. Yes, if they have a Microsoft account. So by that I mean like a Hotmail or I think it's an Outlook.com now, or Live.com, or whatever they're calling it these days. Microsoft have consumer products and that you can go and sign up for. And at this stage you can, if you've got the right sharing set up in the back end and you've turned on the right sorts of allowances in your Office 365 admin to allow external sharing, you can then invite people with those sorts of accounts in, and they can log in with that account. But you need to send it to that right address and make sure that they've used the right address to log in.
And Diana asks, where can we get training on the document management system component?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think there's plenty. One thing that SharePoint, that Microsoft are pretty good at is providing a lot of documentation and help online. You'd have to do, if you wanted a particular course, you'd probably just have to do a bit of digging around. We do, Connecting Up does have a sort of more do-it-yourself SharePoint program that does cover document management in a lot more detail, because it is a pretty big chunk of the system. So you could look into, by Connecting Up, whether there's one of those coming up. Otherwise, yeah, I would start at Microsoft's Help Center and see where that takes you, because there's quite a lot there.
And Maria asks, I assume a really stable internet connection is crucial for SharePoint. Do you recommend a failover internet connection?
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, probably should have mentioned that at the beginning. Look, in general, Office 365, a lot using all of these systems, not just SharePoint, using Yammer, using Skype for Business. They're web-based, so they work over the internet. And if your internet connection is slow or unreliable, then it's a prerequisite for looking at implementing this type of system, is to make sure your internet can handle it, because it will be getting a lot more traffic.
And Margaret asks, what is a SharePoint list?
Good question. Okay, so a SharePoint list, I'll see if I can find here somewhere an example. Oh, well, that's a SharePoint list. So in SharePoint, when you're creating a site, everything in SharePoint is a list or a library essentially, and they're essentially just, a library is when the item, the piece of data is a document or a file of some kind. So the typical one is a document library, which holds, Word, PowerPoint, Excel documents. There's also things called photo libraries or video libraries and other kinds of libraries that are more designed to hold other kinds of files, like photos or image files. And then there are lists. So lists are when the item is not a file, but just an item. So think of a list almost like a fancy Excel spreadsheet. A list is where every item is a row, and a list in SharePoint is just sort of that, but made into in a web form. So every time you add a new form, you're adding a list item. and there's a list in the back end that is essentially just a list of data. And you design, like out of the box, SharePoint's got different types of lists, like a calendar list, a task list, but it also has a type of list called custom list, which is blank, and essentially you can add as many columns and as many sort of columns/fields, because a column is a field, to it, and design it to be, you know, a data set for yourself. So for here, for example, there's a column for tick off, there's a column for task name, there's a column for due date and assigned to, and probably in the back end there are more columns there, but that's only what's being just shown here. And that's really, think of it as a fancy Excel spreadsheet that can do certain things because it's a web-based platform.
Awesome. Gerald asked,
Awesome.
What are the costs for having SharePoint and Office 365?
I, off the top of my head, couldn't tell you what the current cost structure is. You'd have to go to the website, the Microsoft sites, to look into that. For non-for-profits, E1 or E3, I always get them confused. I think it's E3 is the free one, and so Microsoft have made Office 365 E3 licenses free for non-profit organisations. You need to get it registered. You need to kind of verify that your organisation is a not-for-profit with them, and then they will provide it to you as a donation license. E1 is the sort of level up, and a little bit more. You get a few more features where you can like kind of install Office on multiple devices and things like that, and that is I think something like, don't quote me, but I think it's something like $5 a license or something like that, or maybe $6 per license, which is heavily discounted again from the for-profit pricing. But you'd have to go on Microsoft.com to check that stuff out.
And what we can do with that,
real quotes.
Oh, sorry, Stephanie. What we can do with that as well is actually send a link when we send the recording with a Office 365 for non-profits link, and then that'll give you the direct link to be able to register for the Office 365. Jarell and Mike have a question. Is Yammer free? If not, how much does it cost? And it does not appear on my console. Does that mean I need to install it?
Yammer is free. Yammer's free by default anyway to all organisations for just the standard Yammer. You don't have to have Office 365 for it either. You can just sign up for Yammer directly with Microsoft. With Office 365 non-for-profit, obviously it's free, and you get Yammer Enterprise, which is the paid level, which would have been otherwise paid for. So it is free for Office 365. If it's not showing in your console, I would go into your admin center and check whether or not it's been enabled or whether or not you've assigned the licenses to it. It's probably a setting in your admin settings as to what's been turned on in terms of your features, because you don't have to have all of those features turned on, and it's probably in your admin console somewhere.
And do you have to have Office 365 to use Yammer?
I don't think so. No, I think no. You can go directly to Yammer.com and sign up, and as long how it knows that you completely independently from any other Microsoft product, how it knows you're all together is it looks at your email domain. So if you all log in, you've all got to use your work email to join a network, and that's how it verifies you as part of an organisation's network. That's how it was originally designed anyway. Yeah.
Can you use Yammer for communication when you have a group that involves external people?
Yeah, if they're on Yammer as well, you can create what's called an external network. So when you're creating a group, it gives you an option to say, is this an internal group or an external network? And when you just click select external, you can basically, anyone with, I can't remember how you exactly set it up, whether or not you need to then invite them directly or whether you just send them the link, but it's something like that. And then you can just sort of multiple people with different kinds of Yammer, as long as they've got a Yammer account with their organisation, then when you're in your Yammer, you'll see along the left there's like your groups, and then it'll also have your external networks, which will take you to like this other network type. And it's like a group, but a shared group across different Yammer networks.
And Jeff asks, can Skype, Facebook be accessed if you have an external board member not on Office 365?
Can Skype for Business? Or what was it?
That's correct.
Or Facebook? What was it?
For business.
Skype for Business. Yeah. Yes, you can add people. You can add Skype accounts. You can connect to Skype accounts that are not Skype for Business accounts from Skype for Business, but again, you need to check your external settings. You need to talk to your admin and check that that's been turned on for Skype in your Skype for Business settings, that you can connect with external people.
And Maria asks, we currently use server-based access databases. Can they also be used in SharePoint?
Hello? Hello?
Sorry, Stephanie.
That cut off. I'm going to answer. Oh, that's right. Okay.
So how far did you get? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I just heard can server access databases be used in SharePoint? Was that
yes.
point? You can. That's getting a little bit advanced. You can connect databases. You can use SharePoint as almost like a front end to a database, but it does take a little bit of making sure that your connections are secure, making sure that that the two systems can talk to each other and authenticate with each other, and that's a business connectivity sort of tool and add-on that you need to. I don't think it's an add-on, but it's definitely a type of application within SharePoint that you need to do a bit of research on and make sure you set it up properly. But yes, it is possible.
And Margaret asks, how can I create substitute subsites within a home site?
If you've got the right rights and making sure you're an administrator for that site, to do any sort of building of applications and subsites, there's a button called Site Contents. Should be along the left in your home site, but you can also see it up in the cog menu, which is always up in the top right next to your name. There's always a little cog that gives you your SharePoint menu, admin menu, and there's a button called Site Contents. You go to Site Contents and you see all of the back end. You sort of see the back end of your site. You see all of the different applications and subsites that are there. And if you scroll down, you should see, if you're an admin, you should see the words New Subsite, and that's where you create them. But you'd have to make sure you have the right admin rights. So if you can't see that button, then potentially you need to go to your admin to get the right kind of permissions to do so.
And Beth asks a question about contact lists on SharePoint. Their org has contacts in Apple-based products. Could they be exported to SharePoint?
They can definitely easily be exported, like if you export it to some sort of Excel file and then import it manually. Whether or not I'd need to know a little bit more about what she's actually talking about there. Whether or not you want it to be like an automatic, integrated update, which would be a lot more complicated to make happen. But if it's a matter of like SharePoint sites, you can very easily sort of just upload from an Excel file or like import from Excel, and even just copy and paste from Excel into a SharePoint list. And put it in there. So if you just want to manually import export, it's quite simple. If what you're talking about is a little bit more complicated and automatic, then I can't answer that in this amount of time. It would take a bit of analysis on how you do that.
Beth just said it's a one-off, so that should be the easy import export.
Yeah. Do a bit of Googling on how you do that, and you'll be able to find plenty on help on that.
And just two more questions. Stephen asks, are there any scenarios where you would see a SharePoint calendar mailbox as working better than a public calendar mailbox created through Microsoft Exchange?
Good question. I personally am not a huge fan of using calendars in SharePoint. I find them, I don't know why. To me, the calendars in Exchange are really good and do everything you kind of need them to do, and you can use them for. I've got a lot of clients who want to use SharePoint calendars as like a sort of shared calendar solution, like to book rooms, or I don't know. There's lots of times that they want to do it. Sometimes it's useful. I'd say though 9 times out of 10 times, for me, the best calendar tool Microsoft offers is in Outlook.
And finally, John,
the kinds of things you can do in Outlook you can't do. No, you can't do in SharePoint. That's it. Finished. Go.
Just one more last question. John asks, what is a workspace and how is it different from a library?
Good question. A workspace, I believe, is a workspace is kind of an old style from the sounds that I haven't used. Workspace is, I believe, a type of site, a site template. So when you create a site, there might be a project workspace, or I think it gets created sometimes as part of an event, in part of an event calendar. It says create workspace, and it actually creates a whole site. A library is a document storage bucket, and that's all it is. And it's a SharePoint object that will sit in a site. So a workspace is a lot more broad than just a library. It would have pages in it, and it would probably have all these other sorts of features that come along with the site, and you could have libraries within a workspace, but it's not a SharePoint library is just for documents.
Great. So that's all the questions we have for now. Was there anything else you wanted to cover lastly, Stephanie?
No, not at all. Just thanks everyone for your great questions and for listening and for Connecting Up for hosting.
Thanks, Stephanie. And thank you very much for presenting. There were some really good questions today, so some great information shared as well. As always, if you've got any questions after the webinar, please feel free to email us through at events@connectingup.org. As I said previously, I will put a link to the Office 365 for Nonprofits link in the recording that will be sent out within the next 2 business days, also with the slides. But always, don't forget to check our website, newsletters, Facebook and Twitter for any upcoming events. And other than that, have a good day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.